Appreciate that. Okay. Straight back down. All righty. If you haven't got a handout, stick your hand up and make sure you get one tonight. Tonight's lesson, when I realised how much there was in it, I decided to just sort of cut it in half. So I'm going to do the second part next week, where we're going to look at the difference between soul and spirit. Okay, that's a difficult word study, I'll be honest with you. And sometimes it's really hard to discern the context, even in our English translations. So hopefully that'll be a helpful study. Tonight, though, I want to focus on the question here: what will we look like in the resurrection? When Jesus returns and redeems our bodies, what will we look like? Will I look like I do today? Or will I look like the day I died? What about stillborn babies? What about amputees? And people who've had other disfigurements, during this life? Will they still look the same? I mean, have you ever asked yourself questions like that? Have you ever thought about what you're going to look like in the resurrection?
I haven't stopped long enough to care.
Say that again, sorry.
I haven't stopped long enough to care.
I'm sure.
You want to change for a new model? Trade in? Yeah. Well, it looks like the church at Corinth, we don't have all the correspondence that Paul received from the Corinthians, but we could kind of figure out what they were asking and what was on their minds by the way that Paul seems to refer to some of the things that they must have asked, okay? And so tonight's main passage that we're going to look at and unpack is in 1 Corinthians 15, so you won't be turning there. We'll be looking at specifically verse 35 through about 54. That's what we're going to focus on. In Revelation, before we get there, in Revelation chapter 1, I meant to finish with this last time, and so I'm going to start with this passage. Jesus speaks to John and through him and the Holy Spirit to us, and he says this: when I saw him, Jesus, I fell at his feet as though dead, but he laid his right hand on me, saying, fear not, for I am the first and the last, and the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore. And then look at this statement. And I have the keys, some versions say I hold the keys of death and Hades. What is the significance of that statement? Especially that last statement. I have the keys of death and Hades.
I'm sorry, he has a power over everything.
Yeah, he does, doesn't he? In John's Gospel, in chapter 11, verse 25, what does he say to, is it Mary or Martha or both of them? I am the resurrection and, what else is it? The life. The life. What life is he talking about, do you think? Well, it's the life associated with the resurrection. Therefore, it's got to be eternal life, yes? So that's really what he's referring to there. I mean, I mark my Bible up and I scribble in things to help me. So next time I look at that passage, oh, eternal life. Yeah, it's already there. But if he holds the keys of death and Hades, Who definitely doesn't have power over death any longer? Satan. So that's good news, isn't it? And it's at the end of the scriptures in Revelation. So that's comforting to know as well. And therefore, Jesus' resurrection is absolutely significant, isn't it? Because if he hadn't died and been resurrected, then I don't believe that he would have that power, yes, over death and Hades. So he's in control of all things. There's an epitaph. Has anyone ever seen Benjamin Franklin's gravestone, his tombstone? No, you've not seen where. Well, this is what it says, and he's the author of it. He wrote this. He had this written on his tombstone. It says, "The body of Benjamin Franklin," in parenthesis, like the cover of an old book, the contents torn out and stripped of its lettering and gilding, lies here, food for worms. Yet the work itself shall not be lost, for it will appear once more in a new and more beautiful edition, corrected and amended by the author, capital A. Isn't that neat? I mean, he must have a pretty big gravestone, because that's a lot of inscription. But that's kind of neat, I think. So Benjamin Franklin there is making it quite clear that he believes in the afterlife, yes? And the way he phrases that, a new and more beautiful edition, is quite interesting as well. It kind of tells you more about his beliefs. Well, I said our key text is in 1 Corinthians, so I better get turned there. Verse 35, this is what Paul says. But someone will ask, and I really think that means they already have asked him. He's been asked this question by the church at Corinth. And do you think that Paul, when he was with them, taught on this? He taught them everything, didn't he? The whole gospel. He didn't leave anything out. So they've been taught this, but some of them have forgotten. Someone will ask, how are the dead raised? With what kind of body do they come? And what's his answer to that question? You foolish person. Is that a bit of a surprise to you? No? Why not? I mean, if you asked me that question and I said, oh, you fool, you've not been listening, would you take offense at me? I bet you would. I wouldn't be getting any pecan pies from you, would I? So, anyway, well, he's obviously taught them before, and that's why he's kind of admonishing them there. He says, what you sow, and this is really important. He's saying something really important here. What you sow doesn't come to life unless what happens? Okay, why does he say that? What is it that will be sown, planted in the ground for every one of us if he doesn't return before then? Our bodies, yes. And what is he saying about our bodies then? What is planted in the ground doesn't come to life unless it dies. And look at what he says in verse 37. He embellishes what he's just said by saying, and what you sow is not the body that is to be. What's he saying?
Can be different.
So if I plant a melon seed in some nice fertile soil and leave it, am I going to grow a big melon seed?
Sure hope so, if it's watered.
Or am I going to grow a melon plant that's going to grow melons? And they're going to have seeds in them, aren't they? But you can't see them, can you?
No.
Does the seed of the melon that you've planted in the ground look anything like a melon?
No.
No. So why am I giving that example? I could have used a mustard seed. you know, whatever. What's the purpose of that example? Because it's what Paul's saying to them.
Then we'll be changed.
So the body that we plant in the ground, our seed, if you will, that's dead, is it like the body that will be? Nothing like it.
Be changed.
It's nothing like it. See, what Paul's got to do is get us away from our visual thinking. Okay, I'm guilty of this. I promise you. I, for a long time, thought that I was going to be just raised in a new version of me. That if someone put a mirror in front of me, I'd look exactly the same. It's probably when I look my most handsome. You'll have to ask my wife when that wasn't. But probably when I was about, 30 or something like that, or maybe younger. And we kind of like to think in those terms, don't we?
Yeah.
No, Paul says that's foolish thinking. What's put in the ground looks nothing like what will be. Okay, and that's what we call a principle. Okay, it's a principle, and it's an important principle, as we'll see when we get to verse 50. Clue. Okay, let's carry on. But a bare kernel, perhaps of wheat or some other grain, well, I use melon. But God, verse 38, gives it a body according to what principle? What does the text say? As he has chosen. So who's in control of this whole procedure?
God.
God. Kind of takes you back to the garden, doesn't it? He created things according to their type, didn't he? Yeah. There's order to all of it, right? If you studied biology when you were at school, you had to study phylum, and what was after phylum? Genus, species, and all that thing. And you did it for the plant world, and you did it for some mammal or whatever else, crustaceans. And so you could see that there's order, yes? Well, there's order here as well. God's going to give us a body according to what he chooses. And is God capable? Is God suitable to make that choice? Of course he is.
Yeah.
Of course he is. For not all flesh is the same, but there is one kind for humans. He's still helping us shape our thinking here. There's one kind of flesh for, what did I say? One kind for humans, another for animals, another for birds, another for fish. You and I know that's the truth, don't we? Some creatures are cold-blooded, some are warm-blooded, etc., etc., etc. We know all that. There are heavenly bodies as well as earthly bodies. Heavenly body. What's a heavenly body? Give me an example.
It's a better version, a perfect version of it.
Right, that may be. Let's see what he says here. So there's heavenly bodies and earthly bodies, but the glory of the heavenly is of one kind, and the glory of the earthly is of another kind. Okay, so kind of just cogitate on that a bit. There is one glory of the sun. So I think that's an example of the heavenly body that he's talking about here. Right. So he's still in the visual kingdom. Okay. The physical kingdom. The sun is a physical body, yes? And we see it, don't we? And it's not a good idea to see it too well, is it? Because you won't be seeing anything else otherwise. The moon. I mean, the moon looks pretty glorious tonight, doesn't it? Because it's full. And for some reason in West Texas, the moon seems twice as big as it does in England. I don't know why that is, but it really does. Anyway, so the glory of the moon there, and the glory of the other stars as well. For star differs from star in glory. We know that's true, don't we? We've all witnessed it. Okay, so it is with the resurrection of the dead. So all of that stuff he just used from the physical world there, you know, whether it's talking about heavenly objects that we observe in the night sky, or, you know, things that we observe around us, they all have an ability to help us in our understanding of what happens with the resurrection of the dead, talking of humans, okay? There are all principles attached to this. So what does he say about the resurrection of the dead in verse 42? What is sown is perishable. What does that mean? As it relates to the human body.
It's going to decay, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's subject to decay. And I don't know if you've ever seen an exhumed coffin, maybe 20 years, 30 years, depending on what kind of ground and what kind of coffin it's put in. If it's in a lead-lined coffin, there won't be much difference to the body from when it was buried, but it's going to decay, okay? And at some point, if you pulled out a coffin or whatever was left of it from a couple of hundred years ago, even the bones have probably decayed, okay? Again, depending on what ground conditions are like. But so, and I think they said that somewhere, is it Acts 13, 35 or 6? I think Paul says that if you looked at David's tomb today, there wouldn't be anything there, it'd be dust. Okay, because they're about 1,000 years after David died. I mean, 1,000 years, that skeleton's, it's gone, it's gone. So what is sown is perishable, but what is raised is imperishable. What does that mean? Simple answer, it's the opposite of perishable. Okay, so what is raised is indestructible. So you're starting to have a problem thinking about things with human eyes, you know, about being raised at your very best in your university graduation photo or whatever. Even if you could look like, or your wedding photo, you know. Imperishable? That doesn't quite fit what I look at in the mirror. I mean, I don't know whether that's just me thinking, or can you kind of, you know. Yeah. So what's raised is imperishable, principle. Okay. And what's really going on here, if you haven't caught on to it yet, is there's a comparison going on between two kingdoms. What are the two kingdoms? Yeah, the earthly realm and the heavenly realm. Okay, where God is. It, the body that's planted in the ground at burial, is sown in dishonor. Why in dishonor? Because it's dead. In the Old Testament, if you came in contact with a dead body, could you go into the camp? No, why not? Because you are now unclean. And you needed to come in contact with some special water that had been made from the ashes of a, well, not water, but I mean, it had the ashes of a red heifer that had been sacrificed in it, along with some hyssop and various other stuff. That's all in, I think that's in Numbers 19. And until you came into contact with that and then did the rest of the ritual, bathe, wash your clothes, you couldn't come into the camp because you were dirty, you were unclean. Okay. So the body that has died is sown in dishonor because of that person. Okay, it's unclean. It is sown in dishonor, but how is it raised? On the resurrection day, how will our bodies be raised? In glory. What does that mean? That's a big word, isn't it? Doxa in the Greek. Kabod in Hebrew. That's a word study in itself. Maybe we'll do that sometime. In glory. What do you think of when you hear that word and read that word?
Awesome.
Pleasing to God.
Heavenly.
Heavenly. Yeah. Yeah, good, good. Pretty close, I'd say. It is sown, that body that's dead, it's put in the ground in weakness. Why? Well, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? It can't do anything. It's decaying. I mean, if you've ever seen a dead body, it's strange, isn't it? Lifelessness is strange. Yeah. Hard to describe, especially when it's someone that you've known. So it's sown in weakness, it's sown perishable, and it's sown in dishonor. But instead of being sown in weakness, it'll be raised in power, imperishable, indestructible, glorified, and in power. Whatever that power is, it'll be eternal and whatever else it needs to be. Quite a contrast there, yes? Okay. Do you think that can still apply to this body? A renewed this body? Maybe even without all the signs of corruption and everything else that have happened to it. No scars, no loss of hair, no this, that, the other, new, metal parts in my knee and my hip and wherever else, fillings in my teeth and bridges and dentures. Shall I carry on? Have you heard enough? Yeah, yes. I have got dentures.
I think our minds have been processed in such a way when we read back when Jesus was raised from the dead.
I'll get
So
to
we'll
it.
be like him. So that in turn.
Thank you, Abraham, for saying that, because that's very important. We're going to come to that very shortly. But yeah, we do, don't we? And it's going to shock some people sitting here tonight, what I'm going to say about that. But yeah, we have been kind of conditioned to think that we're going to, when John says in 1 John 3:2, well, let's turn there because it's an important passage. 1 John 3:2. Keep your hand in Corinthians. I'll start in verse 1. See what kind of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called children of God, and so we are. And the reason why the world doesn't know us or have a relationship with us is that it didn't know him or choose to have a relationship with him. Yeah. And we know what we will be, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared. But we know for certain, is the Greek word, we know for certain that when he appears, we shall be like him, because we shall see him, how? As he is. I want you to make a note of that passage and come back to it in your own time, okay? Because that's very important in line with what Abraham just pointed me to, and we're going there anyway, so that's good. But back in Corinthians, where do we get to? 44. It is sown, good evening. It is sown a natural body. That's the body that we put in the ground, a natural body. But it is raised, what kind of body? Spiritual body. Now, what do you think that word natural means? Why does he use the word natural body? And why does he use the word spiritual body? What is that description pointing to?
One you can see.
Okay, one you can see,
And one you can't.
one you can. Okay, that's true, but I don't think that's what he's talking about here.
Two different kinds.
Two different kinds, yes, that's true, but I'm not even sure that that's all he's saying here. Why two different kinds? Is he describing the body, or is he describing where that body is intended for? What realm that body was made for? I just gave you a clue, I gave you the answer. I think that's what he's talking about. You see, the natural body is suitable and was created for the natural realm, which is what? Life here on earth. Yes, does that make sense?
Yeah.
So to help us understand something about the spiritual body, if I then said, we're going to be raised in a spiritual body, where do you think that body is made for? The spiritual realm, which is where? Heaven. Now, does that help our thinking a bit? There's still a lot more I'd like to know, as I'm sure you would. But for now, understanding that difference is talking about where we were made for. The spiritual body is made by God, and he chose that body, that spiritual body, because it's the most suitable for the spiritual realm, which is heaven, where he is. Amen? Okay.
So the spiritual body trumps over the normal body, basically. That's how I'm kind of.
Oh, I sure hope so, don't you? I'd be disappointed if it didn't, with you. Yeah, because, well, just give me 5 verses and I'll answer that a bit more fully. I want to get there in order. Okay, verse 45. Thus it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam, which is who? Jesus, became what? Life-giving spirit. What kind of life? Eternal life. An eternal life-giving spirit. But it is not the spiritual that is first, but the natural. So God's order of creation is that we should live in the natural realm first, yes? And then the spiritual. The first man was from the earth, a man of dust. The second man came from where? Heaven. Now he became incarnate, but the personhood of Christ came from heaven, yes? Okay. So that's what he's saying. Verse 48, as was the man of dust, so also are those who are of the dust. Does that include all of us? Just nod your head. Okay, that's all of us, isn't it? And as is the man of heaven, so also are those who are not from heaven, but of heaven. Again, he's talking about a place, yes? Location. The spiritual body that's going to be made for that place, yes? Belongs there. It doesn't belong here. This is already going to cause Jehovah's Witnesses and some evangelicals a lot of distress, because they believe that that heaven is on earth, basically. And so this really kind of challenges their thinking and understanding, doesn't it? But it may challenge yours a bit as well, I don't know.
Hey, I've got a question for you.
Yes.
If heaven is a place.
Well, I don't know if it's a place. I don't think there's a sign.
I don't think it's a place. I think it's being God's presence. I don't think it's a natural place or a realm. It is to be in God's presence.
Right. I understand what you're saying, but it's hard to get away from thinking with our eyes, isn't it? Place, beautiful setting, because we can only compare it to what we've seen and admire on this earth, yes? And I think I know what you're saying. I don't think we're going to be worried about or interested in, if there is trees or mountains or beautiful lakes or whatever. There's only one thing that's going to have our attention and our focus, and that, as you say, is God. So yes, I agree. All right. But it's spiritual. It's so hard for me at any rate, to focus on what does that really entail? I think I mentioned last time or the time before that if you're not conditioned by time and physicality, then your life necessarily has to be qualitative. Yes? Life with God is going to be measured as a quality. Oh, it's going to be good, isn't it? Life, on the other hand, away from God, out of his presence, is also going to be qualitative. But it's going to be really, really bad because God's not in the picture. Yeah? So, and that's kind of a hard concept in itself to, focus on when you're thinking about things like that. But if you've got that, if you can refer to that way, it helps, I think. So, as was the man of dust, verse 48, so also are those who are of the dust. And as is the man of heaven, so also are those who are of heaven. Just as we have borne the image of the man of dust, we shall also bear the image of the man of heaven. Is there any degree of uncertainty in what Paul's saying there? He's speaking the words of the Holy Spirit, yes, which is the Spirit of Christ, yeah? John 16:13. So he's not in any doubt, is he? We will bear the image of the man of heaven, which is who? Jesus. Okay. My version now has a little note that says mystery. Mystery. I tell you this, brethren, principle, fact, flesh and blood cannot inherit what? You need to underline that. It's so important because whatever you believe about the afterlife has to pass that fact, that principle. Flesh and blood cannot, under any circumstances, and that applies to Jesus as well, cannot inherit the kingdom of God. And that's not all he says. Nor does the perishable inherit the imperishable. So if I've got some preconceived idea, or my friend has, about the afterlife, if it fails either of those two tests there, it's not true. Okay. So what kind of body is he going to give us? And what kind of body does the man of heaven have that will return one day to get his bride? It's got to be spiritual. It's got to be spiritual. It's got to be imperishable. Therefore, it's got to be spiritual. Okay?
But it'll look real like a human being, right?
I reckon we're going to, yeah. You know what?
You know,
No,
There's a teacher, Abe Lincoln, who used to teach at Sunset. And he used to say, when Jesus comes back, he says, he'll be up there and we'll all be going, oh, sure, I hope I look like him. I'm quickly checking myself. But it's true, isn't it? We will need to look like him because that's the bride of Christ that he's coming back for, yes?
But we see Jesus as harm, and he's not going to look like that.
Uh-huh. Okay, and I'm coming to that, yes. Good point. That's what my brother Abraham was saying earlier. I'm getting there. We've still got 25 minutes. Okay, behold, verse 51. When Paul says behold, what's he doing? Yeah, listen.
listen up.
I'm about to say something even more important. Wow, I thought what you just said was pretty important. I tell you a mystery. We like mysteries, don't we? What's one of the best or most popular shows on the TV? Mystery, murder, mystery and suspense, yes? So we all like it. Well, what's this mystery? We shall not all sleep. I'm not going to spend too much time on that word because that's the subject of a later study. Okay, that verb sleep. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. We shall all be changed. And how quickly will we be changed? In a moment. How does he describe a moment? In the twinkling of an eye. You know what you did to your wife when you try to get her attention? You know, before you go to the ring. That twinkling of the eye. That didn't take long, did it? How long does it take to twink an eye or flip a finger? Pretty quick, eh? Changed. Oh. Now, I think that more for the for those that haven't fallen asleep. They'll be changed in the twinkling of an eye. But the others that have been dead a while or a long time, they're going to come to the whole thing changed. Yes, they're going to come changed. Okay. And then he describes it a bit more. And this passage is kind of very similar. It's parallel to Paul's passage in 1 Thessalonians 4:17 and following. Yeah, where the church in Thessalonica was, real concerned that they might not be ready or they might miss the return of Jesus. They thought it was coming on the calendar next month or something, or next week. And so Paul had to kind of correct that thinking. Okay, because it could lead to people giving up their jobs and, becoming kind of lazy and idle because they didn't want to work because Jesus is coming next week. So he disavowed them of that false thinking. Anyway, he gives us a bit more information here. That change that's going to happen in a moment and the twinkling of an eye is going to happen at the last trumpet. Okay, for the trumpet will sound and the dead will be raised imperishable and we shall be changed. I don't really like the word shall there because it kind of leaves a little bit of doubt. It's the future tense verb. It should say we will be changed. Okay, which is a bit more definitive, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I prefer that. We will be changed, all of us. Okay. The trumpet. The trumpet's kind of a figure that we're not overly used to in this day and age, are we? We might think of an alarm or something going off, or a tornado siren or something like that. But in the old days and in the Old Testament, the trumpet was significant, wasn't it? In fact, it was the job of the priesthood, wasn't it? To blow the trumpets for the gathering to the tabernacle, maybe for Yom Kippur, or if they were going to war, they would have a different call for the trumpets. Yes? They'd even blow the trumpets during the offering of certain sacrifices. So, trumpets were very symbolic, and I think that's why that is the terminology that's used here. Verse 53. For this perishable body, what's the next word in your text? Must. Does that leave any doubt? Does that leave any doubt at all? Any exceptions? This perishable body must put on the imperishable. What does that mean? Put on. What do you think of when you hear that? Put on. Yeah, kind of clothed. It must be clothed with something else. And that kind of fits in a way, doesn't it? Because what did God put in each of us that's like God? Well, it's the subject of next week's study. The soul that is in us, yes? And it's in us. So when he says the perishable must put on or be clothed in the imperishable, it kind of tells me that he's dressing us in spiritual garb, yeah? Imperishable garb. Okay. But that's not all he says. And this mortal body must put on or be clothed in immortality. When the perishable clothes itself with the imperishable, and the mortal clothes itself in immortality, then and only then shall come to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? On he goes. Well, that was as far as I really wanted to go with that here. But on that day, when the great resurrection happens, death will be swallowed up in victory for us, won't it?
Yeah.
So it's true. Did you notice how those adjectives, I think is the term, how they show the difference between our mortal body, this body, and the body we will receive? Okay. Sometimes you just got to unpack and go slowly through a text and really just push a lot of preconceived ideas aside to let God speak to you. It's not difficult, is it, what he's saying here, really? So, any questions on that? Do you think I'm going to recognize or care about what I look like? I don't think so.
Who knows?
Because it's made, this body is made so that it can be with God. And God's an all-consuming what? Spirit. Well, he can be an all-consuming fire as well, can't he? But he's all-consuming, which means he's going to want and he's going to get all of our attention. And it's going to be voluntary on our part. We're going to want it, aren't we? Maybe we want it now, don't we?
Yep, sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, you bet we do. So, yes.
I'm thinking that possibly in the church, we don't emphasize enough that it's always been God's intention for us to have this body and then this body.
Yes.
That rather than have them as two separate topics, it's really one topic. You know, this life and the next life are linked together. And what we do in this life has implications for the next life.
Right.
Rather than separate the two lives, maybe we should see them more as a whole. That
Is this circular thinking?
I don't know.
I think I know what you're saying. Yes, it's a preparation. All of this is a preparation.
Well,
What's
it's
the
kind of
kind?
like we focus a lot on being like Christ.
Mhm.
Okay, a
Mhm.
lot about that. Instead of thinking, well, instead of thinking, it's always been God's intention that we live in this body for this
Yes.
period of time,
Yeah.
and then live in this body forever, and always link the two together,
Right.
but not be separating them.
But we don't want to let go of this body a lot of the
Yeah,
time,
we
do
focus a lot
Yeah.
on this right
Uh-huh.
now,
we? Uh-huh.
but we need to see the big picture. We need
Yes.
to focus on the two of them
Yes.
together.
Good thought. I want to spend a bit of time on Jesus because that's what I said I was going to do. Jesus' resurrected body is miraculous.
Yeah.
There's no other way to say it. And it's unique. And it's unique for a purpose, not just because it's the only body that was human that never saw corruption, which is prophesied in Psalm 16:10. Peter refers to it in his first sermon in Acts 2, verse 27. And Paul preached about it at one of the churches he went to in Acts 13. I've forgotten the church now, but that's not important. Where he says that, refers to Psalm 16:10, that Christ's body will not see, or Messiah's body will not see corruption. David's body, on the other hand, if you went and looked in his tomb today, you'd just find a pile of dust. Okay, so don't confuse Jesus and David as part of what he's teaching the Jews in that city. But not only did it not see corruption, I love John's account of the resurrection in John chapter 20. Maybe we should turn there for a bit. John chapter 20. John and Peter had a race to the tomb after Mary had her experience with what she thought was the gardener. So clearly, Jesus' resurrection body could be recognizable, and it could at times be unrecognizable. I'm not quite sure I'm there with what all that's about, because I've had experiences where, I think I may have told you this, we went on a trip to Disneyland one time with my daughter, and we met my mum out in Florida. Shame she's not here tonight, but we picked her up at the airport at Orlando, and I could see her on the concourse a ways away when we first saw her, and she was talking to someone. I thought, this looks familiar, but I couldn't place it because that person that I thought it might be wasn't supposed to be there. They were supposed to be 6,000 miles away. My sister, who lives in England, and yet it was her. But it took a while for my brain, for the penny to drop. Have you ever had an experience like that? And we did the same thing when my daughter and I went over and surprised my mum for her 70th birthday. And we turned up at the door, and she didn't recognise us. We're not supposed to be here. She thought her mind was playing tricks on her. Yeah. So I don't know whether that's part of what's going on with Mary and thinking it must be the gardener, because she ain't got it about the resurrection any more than the disciples have. But there may be more to it than that. Anyway, Peter and John have a race to the tomb, and Peter obviously not as fit as he should be. John gets there first, and John bends down and looks inside the tomb, and what does he see, verse 7? Empty, but for what? What does he actually see? Yeah, he saw the linen cloths lying there, and the face cloth, which had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded up in a place by itself. That's what the ESV says. Yours probably says something similar. Now, I have a bit of a grind or a bit of a beef with the translation here. I've spent a lot of time looking at the Greek, but I'm no scholar. But that verb that's used for folded up for the handkerchief could fit very much better with a description of the linen, how the linen was. I don't think when John put his head in that tomb, he saw linen cloths strewn all over the place. Okay, not least because 3 days before, 70 pounds of aloes and other spices, which are real sticky and gluey, were put on them by those that prepared the body. Yes, Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. And if you've ever tried getting that kind of goo off a load of linen strips, very, very messy. They must have had a lot of fun getting Lazarus out of his burial cloths, don't you know? And so I think that verb is better translated with the linen, because anteluso in the Greek means wrapped up. Okay, better than it means folded. It means wrapped up by the body. So I think what he saw was the linen cloths there, maybe slightly indented, and no body. Don't you know that made him think, didn't it? Because what conclusion have you now got to come to? He didn't just wake up and, he swooned on the cross like the Muslims believe. No, something miraculous happened. He passed through those burial cloths. Yeah. Well, that fits, doesn't it? Because that night, where were the disciples? In a room, and it was locked. And yet, did Jesus know the combination?
No.
He didn't need to know the combination to the lock, did it? He didn't need the key. He just showed up there. How did he get in that room? The same way he passed through the burial cloths. So there's something. We use big terms like metaphysical. I don't know what that is. That sounds like something out of Back to the Future to me. But anyway, something miraculous about his body, but also something physical. The reason that we use for why the tomb was opened is the same reason why Jesus had a body that was still recognizable. For Thomas, what did he say? Here, it's me. Look, you see these holes in my hands, my feet, and this gash in my side? Yeah. And if you still don't believe, Thomas, here, give me a bit of that broiled fish, will you? I'll eat it. So he's showing them that it really is him. So it's for it was for the disciples, the apostles' purpose that he had that body, so that they had a proof that he raised from the dead. When you and I are at the resurrection, we're not trying to prove anything to anyone. It's too late for proof at the resurrection, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you and I don't need that kind of body. You with me so far? So I really think that Jesus's purpose was different. Yeah, he walked with those two disciples down to Emmaus. Do you remember? Did they have a clue who was walking with them?
No.
Not a clue. What gave it away?
Scriptures.
When they broke bread. I mean, their hearts were kind of, warm and wow. I remember a teacher who taught like this. Yeah, when they were walking with him, listening to his teaching. Because he told them, you like to have been in his class. He told them everything that the Old Testament prophesied about the Messiah. Wow, I sure would like that class. That would have been better than any of theirs. But when he broke bread with them, the penny dropped, didn't it? They realized who was standing with them, who was fellowshiping with them, breaking bread with them. And then he said, I've got to go. And he just disappeared, didn't he? Gone. So more evidence of this body, this miraculous occasion. When I do my study on John's miracles, I don't stop at 7. I treat his resurrection as a miracle because it's there to prove the thesis of the Gospel of John in John 20, verse 31, that if you believe that Jesus is the Son of God, that you can have life in him, yes?
Yes.
So that's another proof. It served its purpose, and the resurrected Jesus that was with the disciples in Acts chapter 1, just turn there, Acts chapter 1, a few minutes. Read with me in verse 9. He's just given the disciples their theme verse. This is your life from now on. You're going to be my witnesses, yeah? And when he had said these things, as they were looking on, he was lifted up, Jesus was, and a cloud took him out of their sight. What just happened? Did a cloud take him out of their sight? Did he disappear? Did he translate? And while they were gazing into heaven as he went, behold, 2 men stood by those disciples in white robes and said, Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking into heaven? This Jesus who was taken up from you into heaven will come in the same way as you saw him go into heaven. What are they saying there? What are the angels confirming?
He's going to return.
Return.
Yeah. So, however he disappeared into the clouds, it's the same way that he's going to come back. I think he changed on the way up, and the cloud hid it all. But maybe it was because he, being flesh and blood, he couldn't inherit the kingdom of God, could he? So he had to change. He had to lose all of that miraculous body that he had for those 40 days of his resurrection appearances. Yes? And now he sits at the right hand of God in heaven. And what's he doing? Yeah. And when it says sits, and in passages like Ephesians 1:22, where it says, all authority has been given him for the sake of his church, all things have been placed under his feet. And when God is described as having hands and a face, or all these anthropomorphic terms, which is just a fancy way of saying human attributes, is it because God actually has those things? Or is it because he's using that terminology to help us understand what God's doing? I think it's the latter. It's not because God is physical at all. He's spirit. And so Jesus is now as he was before he came to earth and became incarnate. Because flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor can the perishable inherit the imperishable. So he had to have changed. Okay? I hope that answers the question. And I'm looking for Matthew 24:30. If anyone gets there before me, let me know. Yes. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. That's Jesus speaking to his disciples about the end times. It sounds kind of like what we were just hearing from those two angels. And they would know, wouldn't they? So I know we want to know more. Talking of anthropomorphic terms, there's some that even apply to us. You know that passage in Revelation 21:4, we quoted a lot, that there'll be no tears in heaven. Where's tears come from? I mean, that's anthropomorphic. We, as spiritual beings, we're not going to have that stuff. He's not going to be wiping away tears off our face, because we won't have a face in heaven. We'll be spiritual. Yeah? So even those kind of terminologies are used because they're familiar to us. There's a familiarity with it. It helps us understand. It's kind of like when in that passage in Revelation 1 that we just read, straight after it, we get a human description of the Alpha and Omega. And what's coming out of his mouth? A sword. And what do his eyes look like? Blazing fires. You know, and it's kind of a scary picture, isn't it? But it's there to try and help us in our dim understanding of the spiritual. Okay, it's not how Jesus is going to look when he returns, because he'll be spiritual. We just need help understanding where he's coming from. So next week, if you thought this class was difficult, next week we're going to look at the difference between soul and spirit. Just want to close with one thing though. You know that interesting passage in Matthew 27, 52 and 53, which I'm sure he missed a few verses out, where it says that at Jesus' crucifixion, the robe in the temple, the veil was split from top to bottom, and an earthquake happened. And what happened to the tombs in the cemeteries? They opened. And what happened at the resurrection? These people came out of the tombs. And where did they go? They went into town and they showed themselves to many people. And that's it. I'm like, where's the rest of the story? What happened to them? Did anyone recognize them? Was it, who was the guy in the temple? Anna, the prophetess, and the guy who, Simeon. Was it them? Were they two of them? You know, they died, hadn't they, before Jesus even grew up? Did they appear? Where did they go afterwards? How did they come out of the tombs? Well, in their case, maybe God did hoover up all the atoms and particles of their bodies, put them together so that they could do this great, wonderful sign. But I don't think that's how it's going to be for us. Okay? I don't know what happened to those people. God didn't tell us because we don't need to know. It's not important. But maybe he did do something very special.
Jesus was the only one that was raised and lived.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly, maybe they died again.
I don't know.
Maybe they went back to the tombs, I have no idea.
Kind of interesting, isn't it?
It is.
Any other thoughts on that? If not, we're finished. So we'll see you next week.